Draft Mechanic, the board games and craft beer podcast, every other Monday at draftmechanic.net or wherever podcasts are found. Hey everybody, Jake here. Thanks for tuning into this special mini-episode of Draft Mechanic as we're taking a look at the Ignorance is Bliss expansion for Euphoria from Stonemaier Games. Pre-orders for this are going to be open from February 27th through March 2nd, so we're going to release this segment a little bit early so you can have an opportunity to hear our thoughts during the pre-order period. This segment will also be included in the upcoming episode number 96, Expandapalooza 2, that will be going up on the feed as normal this Monday, March 4th. A big thanks to Stonemaier Games for giving us an early look at this expansion, and if it sounds like it's right for you, of course, pre-orders will be open February 27th through March 2nd at stonemeiergames.com. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, grab a taster, and enjoy the show as we talk about Euphoria, Ignorance is Bliss. Okay, so let's get into it. First, a quick introduction if you've never listened to Draft Mechanic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Danielle.
All right, Danielle, you want to hit us with the stats on this one?
Sure. Euphoria, Ignorance is Bliss is an expansion coming out in 2019 from Stonemaier Games that plays 1 to 6 players in 40 to 90 minutes. The designers are Morten Monrad Peterson, David J. Studley, and Nick Shaw. The artist is Jackie Davis. This is a game of dice worker placement, resource management, market building, and totally reasonable consequences.
Completely reasonable.
Nothing weird here.
You weren't using those books. Okay, so if you haven't played Euphoria before, I'll give a quick foundation of the game so you can understand the expansion content better. This is a game of dice worker placement where you have dice, unsurprisingly, that represent your workers. You're going to roll them at the start of the game, and the numbers on those dice represent their knowledge. Knowledge is going to become important because the more workers you have and the higher numbers, aka smarter there are, you might have a little bit of a over-smartness problem, and one of them might run away, and then you have less workers, and that's a bad thing in any kind of worker placement game.
We clearly do not have an over-smartness problem.
Throughout the game, you're going to be placing your dice workers all around the board in order to gather resources, convert those resources into better resources, and then hopefully construct some markets that will allow you to place some of your authority tokens on the board. You're also going to be gathering artifact cards and fulfilling special criteria at those market spaces to place authority tokens into each of the regions of the world of Euphoria as well. The game continues until somebody places their 10th authority token onto the board, and then they get to feel like they are the smartest person in this dystopian future.
They're certainly the one who is in charge.
They are definitely in charge at that point. So the Ignorance is Bliss expansion has 3 main parts to it. First, there's some rule tweaks taking feedback over the last 5 years since the game came out to kind of add some balancing and also some component additions that we'll talk about as we go on. There's also the addition of an automa, which adds 2 automa players for playing with 1 or 2 players to make that 2-player game feel bigger or to obviously let you play the game solo. And then also some more stuff. There's a complete new set of the market tiles that you're building that you can swap out, and there's a complete new set of the recruit cards that you can swap out as well with the base game stuff. So you have a full new set of content for pretty much the most variable part of the game, which is those 2 sections. So I think the more stuff is really the smartest place to start, right? Mm-hmm. This is what a lot of people are going to come to this expansion for at first, because if they are fans of Euphoria and they've played it a lot, they've probably gotten used to the same market tiles and the same recruits and seeing those things come up again and again. We had an opportunity to play this with somebody who's a big fan of Euphoria, and she was super excited to see a bunch of new content right out of the gate with different recruits, different fun ways that stuff will work together, and obviously some of those markets have very interesting new consequences if you do not get on board.
Yeah, and it's always good to just add something that's going to take a strategy that you may have refined over several years of playing this game and change what may work and what may not be as useful to do. Because you're getting these new powers from new markets, or rather new hindrances for not contributing to new markets, and there are new recruits that you have that are going to give you a different focus on how you're going to play your game, this is going to take somebody who is really familiar with something and put them back on a level playing field with a player that is familiar with the game, but not necessarily it's coming to the table all the time for them.
Mm-hmm. And the new recruits obviously give you new ways to tweak and kind of get around certain mechanics of the game. One that came up for myself and another player in one game, we both had a way to manipulate the artifacts in fun ways. I had it so that my book could be any one of the other artifacts, which is super nice because that made it easier for me to use that artifact when I needed to put a authority token out on a particular market that I hadn't got in on, or onto an influence area that I needed to get in on as well. In addition, it also adds in some factionless recruits, which is kind of interesting. All of the recruits in Euphoria are tied to one of the 4 factions of the game, and as you increase those influence tracks for each of the 4 factions at the bottom of the board, halfway through the game you'll be able to flip over a hidden recruit and then get a second power. If you take one of these factionless recruits, they are more powerful, but they are limited in a way that they have to be your starting recruit. You get to start with one and keep one face down for a later reveal. You can never hide the factionless recruit because there would be no way to reveal this. But they have some really cool, powerful powers as well. One of them, for example, allows you to get both a resource and an artifact card when you go to a tunnel space, which the tunnels only provide both of those things instead of an either-or once you've leveled up one of the faction tracks to a certain level, and then you have a recruit of that faction. That this particular guy can get that power all the time, which is really kind of powerful to get right out the gate.
Yeah, especially since artifact cards are going to be one of the primary ways that you're placing stars. You will place a star on a market when you build it with resources, but in order to use the market after that to place your star onto the territory, or one of the ways that you can also place a star onto a market that you haven't helped to build is by using those artifact cards. So if you're getting a lot of those, as long as you keep your hand size up, you're going to be getting a lot of resources that you can use to further your gameplay.
There's another one of these factionless recruits here that's once per turn after you place a worker, you can lose a heart to place another worker as if you had rolled 2 of a kind. So basically always saying you have got doubles from the beginning of the game, and with one of the rule tweaks in this, it already costs you a heart to place that second die on your, if you roll doubles. So having this recruit, basically, you can always place another worker whenever you want just by spending a heart. That's pretty darn powerful.
Well, that does mean you need to have the heart.
Gotta have heart if you're gonna win.
No, I don't think that's actually true.
That's pretty much the opposite of what we're going at in Euphoria here. I'll talk really quickly about the Automa as well. I have not had a chance to actually play with the Automa, but I've been through the rulebook and kind of played a few 1 or 2 turns to see how it would work. It actually adds 2 Automa players into the game, so at a 1-player game you can play as 3 players, or at a 2-player game you play as 4 players. Keeping it so you've still got a crowded board, you've still got a lot of worker interaction and a lot of bumping back and forth. The way the Automa works is really interesting. It has a 2-card setup. You have a deck of cards you set up when you begin the game that is made up mostly of the green ID cards, and you're going to shuffle that deck, flip out 2 of them. One of the cards is going to dictate the actions the Automa will take, while the other card will dictate the locations that the Automa are going to do those actions in. After you resolve that turn, you're going to remove one of the cards, slide the other one over, and then draw a new card, so you get a new set of the way that those things are going to interact. As the game goes on, you're going to add in more cards that have more advanced actions in them as well, so the Automa is actually going to mutate and change as your game goes on. Each of the 4 different colors of cards that this is made up of have, I think, 6 to 10 of those cards, and you're only shuffling in about a third of those cards anytime you play this game, so it's not like the Automa is going to be the same every time you play. In fact, it's going to be very different every time you play with this. I'm actually a little bit bummed that I got called away a few turns into this game because I really wanted to see how this would go, and hopefully I'll get a chance to play that again in the next few months.
The other thing that the Automa adds is a timer for the game, because that Automa player is going to be placing stars in addition to the other actions that it's taking. You can't really go on forever, because there is a timer that's being run by this Automa player, and eventually it will run out of stars and just win if you've been dawdling too much. And I think that's really cool, because we've played this at 2 players, and one of the problems that I had with it was the game can be really long at 2 players, because only 2 people were putting their dice out to further along the tracks. That is also going to dovetail in with some of the quality of life changes that they've made, but it is cool to see this Automa, which makes a 2-player game a lot more snappy.
Gives you a lot more going on, and you're going to have to figure out how to work around all that stuff. So moving on into the final chunk of stuff here, the quote-unquote rules tweaks that are included in Ignorance is Bliss. This is actually the one that I'm most intrigued by, having played with it and comparing it back to the old version of Euphoria that we had played before. The additions are so small but so meaningful that it really impacts the way the game plays. First off, you have a few additional components. You actually get your own personal player mat, which is such a simple and nice thing to have for a game like this. You're tracking your intelligence and heart on your own personal board instead of on that shared track that always got really crowded, and I felt like it was always kind of a pain to manipulate. You also have space, obviously, for your authority tokens, your resources, commodities, and your workers, so you know exactly what workers you have at any time. There's also some nice large wooden commodity tokens that count as 3, which is great because then you don't have to use the kind of 1, 2, 3 resource slider tile thingy that came in the original printings of the game, because you have a giant resource. You can always just, trade in and out as you wish. There are stickers for the tunnels that are each of, the the faction tunnels that will give you a different starting point depending on player count for the worker in that tunnel, which, again, like you were talking about in the two-player game, super, super helpful if that worker starts further down the tunnel and closer to its completion space in a lower player count game. It also adds in an artifacts bazaar, which is an additional board that sits off to the side that will impact the way that you're drawing artifacts throughout the game. In Euphoria, usually you're just drawing off the top and hoping you get what you get, and it's also going to make you have to have a bigger hand size so you can have more and, stack a few artifacts together to mitigate that if you want to get stuff done. With the Artifact Bazaar, you have 4 different artifacts visible at any time. One of them is free when you take an action that gets you an artifact. The other 2 cost 1 commodity each, and then the 4th and final one costs 2 commodities. When you take a commodity, everything else slides down, another one comes off the top, so on and so forth. This is really great. And I love the way that it allows you some agency in what you're going to get, because that could have been the most frustrating thing about Euphoria if you need a pair of glasses and all you got is a whole bunch of baseball bats.
Well, this meshes really well with a lot of the other improvements that were in this expansion, because like you said, a couple of those new workers allow you to use specific artifacts as wild so that they can be any of the artifacts that you need. So if I know that the player to my left really wants to get teddy bears because they're a wild for them, I may spend that extra commodity, if I have it available to me, to take the teddy bear that's in spot 2 so that that player doesn't get it. And it adds a little bit of strategy there. It also works well with the way that markets and territory stars work now. In this expansion, you no longer have to discard 3 artifact cards to place a star onto a market you didn't help to construct in order to be able to use that market's power. You can just use the market's power to be able to place a star onto it. That means that you're going to have the artifact that's required to use that market. Almost all of the markets require a specific artifact. Mm-hmm. So now not only is it not as punishing to be able to place a star onto a market to then be able to place your star onto the territory, you don't need to take that extra step of discarding 3 random artifacts to be able to place your star onto the market, but you have the availability of 4 different artifacts, or up to 4 different artifacts, some of them may be the same, that you can choose from when you are drawing an artifact card. So if I really need a pair of glasses to be able to place my star onto the market that I was not able to help build, I can get that more efficiently instead of just keeping drawing and having to discard cards that aren't useful to me to get the one that I need to be able to place onto that market.
And that really sums up this entire expansion to me. This expansion is about quality of life for the gameplay. There's a lot of really great rules tweaks and component upgrades, and then the things that were added in with the more stuff give you more variability and more interesting combinations that you can play around with. Ignorance is Bliss doesn't massively change the way that Euphoria is going to work. In fact, it just does these simple tweaks that want you to get the game back out onto the table again.
The things in this game that were added, and it had been a while since we had played Euphoria, that's the nature of the podcast beast, and going back to it with this expansion, the things that I was told were new to the game were things that I would have wanted in there from the start. I would have assumed that the artifacts came from a market, because that is the best way for that to be done. Just drawing randomly feels less good to me. So this expansion takes Euphoria, which was a good game to start with, and gives it, I guess, the options kit, which is the the most ideal way to play this game, as far as I can tell. I really like the changes that they've made, and I would not want to play without them.
Yeah, if you're already a fan of Euphoria, I think that this is a no-brainer. It's a great, solid expansion that adds just what you need to make it exactly that. I like that, tricking it out, giving it the ST package.
So if you ever listened to the podcast before, you'll know that we do an on tap every episode where we pick some beers that thematically pair with what we're talking about. So we wanted to pick a beer that thematically paired with the Ignorance is Bliss expansion for Euphoria. We've chosen to go with Blissful Ignorance Double IPA from Lupulin Brewing Company in Big Lake, Minnesota, which is just right outside the Twin Cities. It is a 9% ABV, 70 IBU double IPA that is brewed with Citra, Mosaic, and Columbus hops. It's blended to be really juicy, and it is left intentionally cloudy to create a soft mouthfeel. So if you've ever had a New England IPA, this is going to be a double IPA that feels a lot like a New England IPA. Mm-hmm. It is available year-round in 12-ounce cans, so if you are up in that St. Paul, Minneapolis area, go check it out.
That's a really good sounding beer. The New England style double IPA is like what I recommend to people that never liked IPAs before, because it's not that piney, super hop bitteriness. You get a lot of that citrus and tropical flavor in there. So maybe it's the way IPA could have been in the very beginning, and kind of like the expansion that we just talked about, something that's kind of an essential place to start if you're playing the game.
And 9% ABV, it's also going to sedate your players a little bit, so...
Yes, maybe one slowly over the course of the game. So thank you so much for joining us for this little Draft Mechanic mini episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you're looking to get in touch with us on the internet, draftmechanic.net or at draftmechanic on all your favorite social media feeds. Danielle, I think we're done, right?
No, as always, on our regular episodes, I would like to remind our listeners to please game responsibly, and tell them that I'll see them back here on Monday, March 4th for Expandapalooza 2.
Cool. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Punchboard Media,
where we all
bring something
to the table.
Pull up a chair
at punchboardmedia.com.